Oh, we are live. Okay, awesome. All right, so hey, folks, and welcome to iWizard. So, hey, I have some special guests with me today. We'll do this one at a time. First, we have a returning favorite, the Emperor himself, science fiction author, and a good friend of mine, Christopher Rocchio. Welcome, Christopher.
Well, that last one was true. That last one was true. The rest of it, I mean, I guess I am a science fiction writer, but you didn't do the whole imperial title this time, which is.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's even annoying me. So I appreciate.
I made it longer. Actually, I added more to the grand title. I realized that the Silent Emperors was less long than the Austria-Hungarian ones, and I said no. So
I got to write that down. I got to write that down. I remember I was going through your books and I was writing down all the titles, and I thought I'd embarrass you with that. All right, and so joining us tonight alongside Christopher, we have a first-time guest, a duo. I heard they need no introduction, but Christopher actually introduced me to their channel like a month ago, and now I cannot stop watching their addictive content. This is Austin and Richard from 4toRamble. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for having us on.
Thank you. I also prefer to go by Emperor, but I'll let it pass, I guess.
We got to get to know each other first.
Okay. All right. Fair. Whatever. Thank you, Bush Jordan.
Of course. So my inspiration on this one for doing this actually came from a roundtable discussion that I had on Christopher's channel a few years back, not long after I started this channel. Dave Butler was there too, and the topic was what makes for great fantasy literature. And Christopher was an excellent host, but Dave and I ended up doing most of the talking. And I still hear from people to this day who say that, man, that was such a fascinating discussion. So I thought I'd do a version of that on my channel and brought it out to Sci-Fi as well, because there's a question I can't get out of my head, which is that I often wonder why I'm so drawn to fantasy and sci-fi. I'm a grown adult, guys. I pay my taxes and go to work every day. I'm going to be a father soon. And so I keep wondering, of all the things that I could be doing with my life, why am I so drawn to fantasy and sci-fi literature? Why am I spending my time reading about spaceships and dragons? I teach a course about fantasy and sci-fi at school. And so I wanted to start with that, and maybe we can kick it off with Richard and Austin. Why do you read speculative fiction? Why are these the genres that you keep returning to? What's in it that's so rewarding or enriching?
Oh,
for you guys, either one of you could go first.
Rich, I have something that came to mind. You want me to go first, and then
go ahead?
Leave it to you. I guess for me, specifically fantasy and sci-fi, when you're going to do something in quote unquote your free time, you have entertaining things, and then you have, if we were to say an opposite in some regards, art. Now, those can both be true. And that's why I love sci-fi and fantasy, because if we define entertainment as something that distracts you from your day, that's just fun and you can escape, entertaining, great. And then if you say, on the other hand, art is something that you can reflect upon or think about, change your life. Some of the best SFF is both entertaining and thought-provoking, and is an art form of you are completely immersed and get lost, and then after that just keep thinking about it because it just can't get out of your head. So I think I'm a bit biased because I geek out and it's the most entertaining stuff to me, but to me it's more than that. To me it's something that I then like to apply in my very nerdy ways, and hence we made a whole podcast off of it because we can't stop talking about it. So I think that's the crux of it for me. But what about you, Rich?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, biggest reason I stuck with it, especially right after college, of why I got back into sci-fi and fantasy, was mostly the escapism of it, and that's what I wanted. But then it grew into, like, once I felt like I've escaped enough, I really enjoyed reading more reflective pieces. And the fact that it does give you both is what I really enjoy about it, where there's something that just really enjoyable about being able to, once you finish a great sci-fi novel, to then walk around your life and see the nugget of something that could be, and being able to, like, it makes your everyday life a bit more magical, of imagining like that world, like, oh, there's a seed of something true here. I wonder if that's where the future is going.
I
That's
love
what
that.
I enjoy seeing.
I love that. The nugget of something that could be. That's so very true. That just resonates true in terms of why I'm always drawn to it. Let me ask you, Richard, to follow up. What is it that you, if this isn't too personal, that you feel that you're escaping to? And what is it that you feel that you're escaping from? Because escapism, I will admit, is a powerful motive. It's a powerful, from Austin. I'm going to admit that's one of the reasons I read fantasy and sci-fi is to escape. What would you say about that?
The period in my life where I read the most was when I hated my job. So when I really hated my job, that was when I read endless amounts of sci-fi and fantasy, mostly fantasy actually at that point. And so when I didn't like where my life was at the moment, I read more, which it's interesting of as my life has gotten better, my monthly read, my reading amount has definitely shrunk, even though I still love it. I definitely don't have that same voracious desire of, there were periods in my life where, like specifically the Wheel of Time, I would read it when I was at home. I would read it during work because I was a security guard, and then I'd read it on the way home. I was doing more than 12 hours of reading a day, basically.
Wow.
And I don't have that same desire anymore. I don't want to read for 13 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
But I still want to read for a couple hours a day if I can.
That's interesting. I mean, let me ask both of you, and then we'll go to Christopher on this, just as a follow-up. Is there a sense in which when you read fantasy and sci-fi, is there a part of you that's looking for something like virtual reality? Are you trying to enter a new world and immerse yourself in it? I know that when you talk to fantasy and sci-fi lovers, one of the things that they talk about is, what would you say? They will admit that they like big books and they cannot lie. They actually they like the fact that the books are big and immersive and that the series are 10, 12 books long, because there's something that they can live in. It's the never-ending story, so to speak. Is there a part of that appeals to you? Because there as a fantasy fan, there is something that irks me when I hear a booktuber say, these darn chunky books, I want to get back to reading 150-page, 200-page books, and I think, I'm not sure I really do. What do you guys think about that?
Why don't you go first,
Yeah.
Austin?
Yeah. So essentially, are you asking them when people are off put by those long books and what gets us excited about those? Or sorry if I'm
also, is there an element of virtual reality to it? Is this part of the escapism? Is there an RPG element to it? Do you want to escape into these worlds and kind of live in them? Is there a sense that you want to be part of a living, breathing world, like Portal Fantasy? You want to enter into the wardrobe and come out the other end?
Yeah, there can definitely be that aspect. I think, again, SFF has the advantage of, to me, why it's the top tier, the best you can get in fiction for me, is limits within limitlessness. So you can, even though it could seem absurd, anything could really happen, but the best of authors set your expectations properly of knowing what, so to make the world feel real and immersive, just like the real world is one way of doing it. So I would say that it's definitely a case. I am less of probably the world first reader than Rich is. I think things such as world and prose, like I can admire. The more that I've been reading as well, the more I admire it. When I was earlier on in reading and getting back into adult SFF, I was less keen to focus on that, but more over time, you start to see when it's done poorly. And then when you just don't feel immersed, that sometimes the good stuff, that stuff where you do really get into that virtual reality, you can take for granted until you read something that is going, okay, now you understand the things you've been reading and the qualities have done such a good job at immersing you. You didn't ask any questions, or your immersion wasn't your immersion wasn't broken at all. So yeah, I think Rich, you'd have a good way of putting that too. And honestly, let's keep going with this and ignore Rockio, by the way, because I think Rich and I have some good stuff to to say on this. So, yeah, Rich, what do you
Well,
think on that part?
I was going to say something and pass it to Rockio because I think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
So when Wheel of Time for me is the biggest, like, hey, that's the massive series that I fell in love with. I was in the world, and that was my virtual reality was the land of the Wheel of Time. But as the further away I get away from that, I find myself liking a bit more constrained, tighter novels. I now see I have higher expectations now for really, really long books. So if something is 1,000 pages, I kind of look at it and goes like, it better be worth 1,000 pages. And where I'm now leaning on the side of like, this is coming from a reader, not a writer, and this is why it's a great question to pass Rockio. In some ways, other than like the actual time and how hard it is to actually write a very long book, I see it almost as like the easier, like it's almost easier to write the 1,000-page book than a really tight 500-page book, of taking these grand ideas, especially with sci-fi fantasy and how much you have to set up. I find it, like, I'm really impressed with the skills from authors being able to do that amount of work in much shorter pages. And so I admire a lot of shorter novels where I'm thinking to myself, like, man, a worse author would have stretched this by 200 pages. But is there any truth to that, Rockio?
No, there 100% is. Because what I have found, I will start with the quick riposte and say it's actually harder still to write a really, really long, tight novel than it is to write a short, tight novel. But no, you're right.
That's a fair point.
You know, I'm not saying that that's what I've achieved, but I have found that my word counts have gotten away from me as things have gone on, and I do think that is the byproduct of a lot of things. Hubris. You know, sometimes the editors will ease off as well. That hasn't been my experience precisely, but I know writers for whom they've been at it long enough that they just sort of, editors will just pass it through, you know, whatever, you know, got enough New York Times #1s. We don't have to mess with this. You know, it'll just sell, you know, put your work somewhere else. That does happen in publishing sometimes. And then other things will get in the way. I know one writer who changed from typing to verbal dictation, and his books just exploded in length, right? Just because the input technology was different. But I do think that a smaller, tighter, more precise novel is more impressive. You know, someone said in the comments, it sounded like you've been bitten by Gene Wolfe. And like I said this in, you know, we were talking about Shadow of the Torturer a couple weeks ago on Talking Story. Those books basically have like no wasted words at all. Like, they are so precise, right? It's like reading a Rolex. It's just, everything is just exactly where it needs to be and works in exactly the right, you know, timing and meter with everything. It's just it's just great, right? And that is substantially harder than just writing 500,000 words, right? Whatever those 500,000 words may be. It might be great 500,000 words, but to achieve Book of the New Sun, I mean, for example, right, is an achievement, right, all its own, and of a different kind. But for me, to circle back to the original question, right, I started reading science fiction and fantasy for a very different reason than I continue to, because obviously my relationship with the genre, but the art form itself, right, literature, has changed because it's my job now. And to a certain extent, that means that reading has become more onerous because it tastes like work, which means that I have to approach it differently, which means you know, and this extends to like other media, right? I've been watching, I watched Andor, for example, and like, I'm just like, oh, that was pretty great, but like, what if they had done, you know, something differently, right? Mostly I think it was pretty good, for anyone in the comments asks. I have some qualms with it, but not important. What's important is that when I started, you know, we talk about escape. I never liked the word escape growing up, and I still don't, because there's sort of a pejorative angle to it, connotation to it, where like, oh, you know, like, you're reading escapist literature, right? What, you like having fun? But there's sort of a sneer that either academics or your mom might express. You know, less so now. Being a geek is a lot more acceptable than it was when I was a kid. My parents were supportive of reading, but like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe Jordan, you may remember this better too. That because you're a little older than me, that people were a little bit more snide about science fiction and fantasy than they are now. There was always this sort of like, that's not real, right? That's silly, right? Sort of thing to it. But I thought rather than escape, I wanted an adventure, right? I am still Bilbo Baggins. I felt a lot like Bilbo Baggins as a kid. It wasn't that I needed to get out of where I was. My life was pretty good. My parents were wonderful. My family life was good. But like, if I could go fight Mordor or Darth Vader or whatever, that would be great, and then I could come home, right? I could go steal some treasure from a dragon and then come back, and that would be great. I would be home again, and there would be treasure, right? That would be even better than never having left or escaping, right? And so I read for adventure, and less so now, because what I found is as I've written more, as I've been a writer, just sort of in the culture of writing more, I have become less enchanted of a lot of literature, particularly like a lot of stuff that's made now, because we just are producing art at a rate that is not in keeping with, I think, humanity's ability to produce artists. Well, I'll say no more about that. But I do think that a lot of stuff has just sort of left me kind of cold. And so I had to think about like what it is I really, really like about science fiction and fantasy, because so much of it falls flat for me. And now it's way less about the escape or about the adventure, right, than it is about what the art is saying. And if what the art is saying is interesting, or even better, if it's true, right, in that sense that fiction is true, right, even when there's a dragon, right, what does the dragon mean? And is that talking about something that's real, right? There are threats that feel like dragons, right, in real life. And so reading a story that's slaying one is about that challenge, whatever that challenge is, right? I had this joke, I pull out panels, right, where I insist that vampires exist, and then kind of sound like a crazy person, and then say, and ladies, you've all dated one, right? And everyone knows what that means. Fantasy and science fiction, I think, concretize this sort of symbolic layer of how we relate to reality, how consciousness relates to reality, and makes it real in the narrative in a way that, like, the dragon in Red Dragon by Thomas Harris is just a guy, right? Like, he's a dragon, but because he acts like one. But it's cooler if he was really a dragon and like ate a village, right? Instead of was just a serial killer. Not that Red Dragon is lame; it's in fact very good. But I like science fiction and fantasy because, in a sense, they feel closer to that sort of like reality of experience. Like, we all feel like our challenges are hordes of goblins and dragons and impregnable fortresses and stuff. And I think fantasy especially appeals to people more so than science fiction, because that's a world we all sort of recognize symbolically in a deeper, more felt sense than science fiction. Because science fiction is like one guy's or lady's abstract vision of what the future might be like, and that's like a way more nebulous thing than knights and castles, right? And I largely think that's why fantasy is an edge. It's a lot easier for people to imagine, medieval Europe but with magic, right? Or medieval India or whatever, or that there is magic in modern day Chicago or what have you, than it is to sort of picture whatever goofy alien I've made up. But I that was sort of a very big answer in like lots of little parts, but I think I'll just.
Well, you said, Christopher, you've said in the past that you feel that fantasy's job in some sense is, well, you've said that fantasy is in some sense more real than reality. Yeah. It's meta real. Why don't you go into that a little bit? What do you mean
it's
by
like
that?
I was saying with the dragons, right? Like, I do think that dragons exist, right? I think that Santa Claus exists. This is an idea. There's a Christian artist called Jonathan Pageau talks about. He makes icons for churches. He's an Orthodox guy. And he has this whole spiel about how Santa Claus is real because once a year your parents pretend to be him, right? And so the idea of Santa Claus, the spirit of Santa Claus, exists in something that's more than a metaphorical sense, right? Because like Santa Claus's actions are happening, right? Like gifts are appearing under the Christmas tree. And like that is real, right? And the thing that your parents as a kid are participating in when they pretend to be Santa Claus and they keep the story going is real, right? The same way that that guy you dated is a vampire, right? You did invite him into your life and he did suck the blood out of you, right? Like that did happen for real, right? It's not exactly a metaphor. It's a little bit stronger than that. Yeah, I'm sorry, John. It's Santa's not exactly real. He's not real the way that this desk is. But I do think in that same sense, I think Middle Earth is real in a way that some sort of bloodless, modernist novel about sad people, in Washington D.C. is not real, right? It's like I have a lot more in common with Bilbo Baggins than I do like someone in California in a lot of ways, I think. I'm picking on California for some reason, but I think that we can relate to those experiences in a way because I think that way of looking at the world is more normal to us than the scientific method, if that makes sense. And so I think that is where the appeal of fantasy comes from, sort of underneath that layer of adventure or escape, right? It's an adventure to or an escape to a world where that way of looking at the world is solid, right, and not analogical. And so I think that's where a lot of the appeal lies. But I also think that appeal manifests in a lot of different ways. I think for a lot of people like Christopher, that's like way too abstract and goofy. If they don't agree with me, right? I just think it's cool. That's the same thing actually, because coolness, thinking something is cool, is a measure of your relation to something and your engagement with it, right? Which is what I'm talking about. So, I see no point in reading sort of realistic fiction because it's actually faker. It's still participating in it's participating in an additional level of illusion, right? To pretend that all there is the world of atoms and objects that we pretend we live in, and I don't think we do. So,
maybe you're getting across the idea of like, one of the reasons why people like stories and fiction is the idea that there is some type of order, and that in our reality, things in many ways, something that wouldn't pass in a story happens all the time in real life. We have things like plot armor, or oh, that's a Deus Ex Machina, all these kind of tropes that like it's a taboo to use in stories. That happens all the time in real life. There is no real ending. There are no rules necessarily. But in fiction, you actually do have, there is a sense of order, and it's at least a bit more clear of an understanding, where reality, you can muddy the waters with, all the details of strangeness, that if you're trying to make it all gritty and like real life.
That's interesting, Richard. It almost sounds like you're saying that in some sense, in order to write fiction that is palatable and entertaining, in order for people with, a human nature such as ours to even enjoy a book, there has to be a narrative arc that makes sense, that has a direction, that has a telos, that has exposition and rising action and a crisis and a fall and that sort of thing. There needs to be stress and release and things like that. And that's a kind of order that real life doesn't have, that there's a kind of chaos and an ennui and an existential angst to real life that when you're reading fantasy, there's something a little bit more noble, a little bit more teleological, a little bit more transcendent about fantasy literature. What say you to that? What do you guys think about that?
I think the greatest defense of fantasy comes from, that I've read. There's others, but Tolkien's On Fairy Stories. We read that essay relatively recently, so it's top of my head right now. But I think Tolkien coined that term, arresting strangeness, and what fantasy is able to do. And one of the things that as we're talking about escaping, sorry, I'm looping back what we were talking about prior to, with escaping into fiction. He called it's the escape of a prisoner, not the flight of a deserter, in that sense of what Tolkien is saying. I mean, Tolkien's worldview as well, of looking at, and you could see this through Middle Earth, of his thoughts about nature and and seeing that the orcs are representing this progress, or not necessarily progress, but just this industrialization of sorts that that is affecting. And you see how much he just loves describing a simple tree. So obviously Tolkien is a fan of fantasy in that sense. And as Tolkien would describe, or as Tolkien would put it, he is saying that arresting strangeness and writing fantasy and sci-fi, which I think I tend to agree. I'd be curious what you think, Rockio, of how you were mentioning something about how even reading modern books, it's almost like the curtain was pulled back, because now that you are the magician doing the work behind the scenes, does that make it a layer of, I don't want to, maybe the word's jaded, but now that you know how the magic trick's pulled off, does it make it harder to escape, whereas you would have in the past?
Yeah, for me, the thing that gets me, period, is good writing itself, right? If someone is a good writer, this is the thing. I obviously, so like there's a little bit of a bugbear here in that my most persistent strain of criticism is that I am derivative, right? And I do not understand the fetish for originality at all. I don't get it, because like a lot of novel ideas don't work. An upside down toilet is useless. Right? You know, and in fact dangerous to your health and cleanliness. Health and hygiene. Let me edit that. That's some alliteration. Whereas ideas like narrative tropes work because they work, and they work because they have worked. And now there are things you can see too many times, but I get very frustrated when people are like, "Oh, that's a trope." Like, yeah, of course it is, right? For most of like literary history, characters were archetypes, right? Most comedy forever, and it still kind of is tropic. Characters literally were masks with class names, right? Harlequin, you know, Columbina, Puccinella, right? You didn't know what the story was, but you knew what that character did every time you see him, right? And so writers would just iterate on those sort of molds, right? They might change the character's name, but you could recognize, like, oh, that's you know, that's Scaramouche, right? Like, I know what he's gonna be like, right? Even though his name is not that, right? And you know, you think about the telling and retelling of like King Arthur stories, right? People expect, you know, Galahad to act in a certain way, Lancelot to act in another, and when they don't act like that, it sucks, actually. And you see this in like modern retellings that ruin things because people want to turn the toilet upside down. But the thing that transcends that is craft, right? And so if a writer is a good writer, it doesn't matter if the story is one that you have seen before, because what you should be experiencing is the story, right? I had a guy on Instagram, Yusuf, if you see this, great question, right? Is like, why do I like give the ending away, you know, to Sun Eaters? Because I don't want you to read for what's on the next page. I want you to read the page that you are reading, right? I want you to read the words and like read the story. I want you to watch the movie. I don't want you to wait for the post-credits scene so you can see what the next movie is. Like, be where you are, right? Read the page that you're on. And people don't do that anymore. They read so they have something to talk about, not so that they have an experience. They do this. We do this with everything, right? We eat food so we can take pictures of it. Eat the damn food. What's wrong with you? Life is very short. It should not be about impressing other people. It should be about being where you're at, right? This is the Yoda thing about, you know, never having your mind on where you are, right? And I'm bad at this too. Like, I have next books to plan. That's annoying, right? I just want to write this one and for it to feel like an accomplishment. But
it's always a surreal moment, Christopher, when you're at a concert and you're seeing this legendary band before you, and you're standing there enjoying it, and you're marveling at how surreal it is that you're 10 feet away from this legendary band that is connected to so many nostalgic moments that you've experienced, and loves and heartbreaks and all these things. And you look around and everyone is watching it through a screen. Right. And you think to yourself, why would you separate yourself like that?
For just 1 second, right? Or, you know, nature intervenes, you have to go to the bathroom. That's annoying, right? You just can't be present, right? It's and so I wanted really very much to make people read the damn book. And so I wanted to take at least some of the tension of what's going to happen on the next page away from you, so that you would look at something else. And so it's annoying when people give the books bad marks for that, right? Or for the derivative thing. That's annoying for different reasons. But when they're like, "Ooh, I already know the ending," no, you don't actually, right? Because what you have not done is read anything. You think you know some things, right? But you haven't read the book yet. And so what I look for is writing that's good, because if the writing is captivating in itself, it's worth reading, even if I know, that King Arthur dies at Camlan at the hands of Mordred. I don't care, right? If it's a good version of that, it's worth seeing, right? I don't need to see new scenes. I don't need, Vortigern to have some sort of sea monster with tentacles, right? I was just thinking about the Charlie Hunnam movie, which I actually don't hate, but because the soundtrack is really good. But like there's so much in there I didn't need. I needed to see the sword get pulled out of the stone, right? I needed to see the things I was expecting. And
have you read Bernard Cornwell?
I have
at all. Oh my God!
One day.
Yeah.
To take that idea, like to dumb it down, or like it just popped into my head of like, this is I feel like a stupid comparison, but I think accurate, is compare the current TV trends of before, like, the 90s era, and then even especially before Netflix binge-worthy 8-episode, 10-episode drama series. You have the seasons of television that are, 25, 23 episodes, where the cast of characters that everything's going to work out in the end, of like the ending is never a surprise. It's about the adventure in that individually contained episode. And if a series is, if a TV show is worth watching and people will continue on, it's not because, what's going to happen next. They know everything's going to work out fine in the end, but it's the writing and the quips and the relationship back and forth. The characters in some way turn out to be, archetypes. You have the funny one, the uprighteous one, but then you compare that, maybe that is more valuable, and maybe that is a higher craft than, say, an 8-episode Netflix drama where every episode ends on a cliffhanger of what's about to happen next. Am I at all off base there, Christopher? Of like,
no, I think
I'm
that's
kind of
one,
seeing.
I think that's one version of it. It's funny you mention that, because I just watched Twin Peaks, right? Which famously people don't like season 2 because it kind of literally loses the plot in the back half. I didn't even notice. I was just having such a lovely time, and then it really comes back together there at the end. Whereas the third season, which was made in 2017, was just sort of, it was weird. It was both like relentlessly sort of breakneck, laser focused on the plot, and then David Lynch likes to just take 10 minutes to make you watch a guy sweep a floor, which I think is hilarious. It was painful, and like I was totally like, I'm gonna check my phone, but what if something important happens? I don't know, and I think part of the point of that was to make you think about that part of you, right? Not watching the show correctly. But it was nice, and I love, like, I think we talked about this last time. I love Stargate, right, which has 20 episode seasons, and you don't have that anymore. And now, is it the case that, like, if you just want to tell the core story of SG-1 that you need all of those episodes? Of course not, right? But like, if you did just do like a 10 episode season version that maybe SG-1's 5 seasons, and you like just do the like main focused gold plot, right? You lose all this time with Carter and Daniel and Teal'c and O'Neill and and the rest, Mitchell and Zala, and the time with those characters is really what makes the show special, right? Now, I don't know that you necessarily need everything to be like that, because we were also just declaiming the virtues of shorter books, right? But there is something to be said about that space for something to breathe, right? And there is something to be said about even like not so tightly written longer books in the same way. It comes back to execution, right? And if the writer is skilled enough to make a walk through the forest interesting, then it's worth reading. And I've like never resonated with that critique of Tolkien, right? It's like, oh, he talks about the trees so much, right? Yes, because they're all going to get chopped down by Saruman by the end, and you're going to be sad about it damn it, right? And like nobody thinks the ending is bad that I'm aware of, right? And like to make the ending work, you need to appreciate all of the trees. Otherwise, it's not sad because none of the hobbits are murdered when they get home. It's not that there's old Odo Proudfoot's head is on a pike. All right, it's just that they came and built a damn new mill, and William Blake and Tolkien are sad about it. That was for you, Jordan. But
I might have to clip that. That was so funny. That was a great Christopher Rocchio banger, all-time great quote. Just quick question, then we'll go to the gentlemen, Austin and Richard. Real quick, follow up on that, Christopher. Katie Whitfield says everything is derivative of what had come before it. Yeah, that's kind of along the lines of what I wanted to ask you. Going back to I'm wondering what your view is on this. Is that the Enlightenment thinkers who were empiricists, John Locke and David Hume, obviously, as you know, Christopher, their theory was that knowledge derives from experience. That they weren't rationalists. They didn't believe that we came into the world with preset ideas, that everything that we knew came from our experiences of the world. And it's interesting enough that Descartes was a rationalist, but Descartes said, this is a great quote. He actually said this, that it's impossible to invent your own fantasy creature. Because whatever fantasy creature you create, you're just going to be making it out of pieces of animals that actually exist and putting them together. I think it was one of the empiricists, I forget who it was, it might have been Hume, who said, technically, if you want to take it really far on the empiricist point, this cult of originality, this idea that we think that it's actually possible to create completely new things, tabula rasa, someone like Hume would have said, technically speaking, if you want to get really granular about it, even when you write a song, you're not inventing the notes. You're just putting together notes that already exist in a new combination, just like the fantasy writer or the sci-fi writer. If you want to make a new alien, you're going to make it out of, these guys just read Project Hail Mary, and yeah, the alien was really interesting and original, and he breathes sulfur, but he's like a spider basically. And that's fine. And, there are archetypal critics and evolutionary people who will say, this is something the anthropologist Lynn Isbell talks about. If you go all the way back 60 million years ago to our tree-dwelling primate ancestors, their biggest threat was snakes in the grass. And the reason that we're so fixated with snakes as evil is because we actually developed neural circuitry to detect snakes. And of course, the ones who are best at random mutation at detecting snakes were the ones who lived longest and produced the most offspring. And so that's actually why we write snakes as evil into all of our stories and why they're always associated with vision, etc. Are you one of those? Is that a bit reductionist, or do you think along those lines in terms of originality and where our ideas come from? And are all of our sort of are all great stories sort of archetypal in that way? It almost seems like there's a determinism to them. What do you think about that?
Was that for me? It broke up a couple.
Yeah,
times.
It was for you, Christopher.
It was for
how
me.
do you
Okay.
how do you
I just
think
make sure
about
I don't
that?
want to jump on the other guy.
Are you like an archetypal person?
I am a Christian. I am a Christian, and so I do not believe that human beings can create ex nihilo. I think that's the exclusive province of God. But I do think, right after the model of Tolkien, who is my greatest influence, which is maybe not obvious considering I write science fiction and it's quite dark. But I don't think Tolkien would like the books very much. But
that's actually very true. I think he would hate them.
Yeah, I don't think he would like them. But it's okay.
He famously didn't like Dune, right?
Right. Well, I think we could talk about that,
Sonny
but I
was a
think it
little-
was for a different reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was for a different reason.
True.
I think I don't think he'd like Wolf either, maybe. And I could be wrong because he also liked Conan, so I don't know. He liked Howard specifically, which he told Sprague de Camp, which is very funny. Take that, Sprague de Camp. Because he wrote some Conan too. I don't know if you guys know that, but he was. I think it might have been a jab. But Tolkien beat Tolkien. But I don't think it's possible to just make up stuff. I think that we live in a story, right? The story, right? Of the universe itself. But I also think that we live in a culture and in a tradition, right? And what a tradition is like a network of memes, right? And I don't just mean like funny pictures on the internet. I mean ideas, right? And some of those are narrative, and some of those are religious, and some of those are mythological or culinary or whatever, right? But you exist in like interrelationships with all of these things, and so for your book to be an upside down toilet, for it to stand apart, is to say, I don't want to be part of the conversation. It's like turning around in the elevator. Everybody hates that, actually, right? Except apparently when artists do it, which is very strange to me. Some artists, some of the time.
But I
if it
thought
was
your
a mime,
favorite
they'd
work
have
of
a
art,
problem with it.
Christopher, was the urinal, Marcel Duchamp. I thought
I'm
enjoyed...
picking on specifically Duchamp here. Okay, so I went to MoMA, right? This is not strictly relevant, and I was struck the whole time. Nobody was really paying attention. They were like walking through and talking the whole time, and we got to the room with the water lilies in it, Monets, which I didn't realize were huge, right? I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're enormous. They're like 8 feet tall or something. And everybody shut up. It was silent in that room. And I was like, oh, because the art is real, right? It's not an I wanted to. I do think I think the great art not conforms, it's the wrong word, belongs, right, to the like conversation, right, of a culture, right? Now it can cut against that. It can critique the culture. A lot of like Dante does to an extent, right? And it's like a pillar of the Western canon, but it is critical of the Western tradition,
Milton,
Western culture in a way.
Paradise Lost.
Right? Not only, but it reifies other things. But like, but Milton, right? Your boy, Jordan, right? But like, you have to be part of that, right? Or at least it's not unusual to be part of that. And for me, I wanted my work to be part of science fiction, right? And to do that, it seemed to me I needed to talk about science fiction. And so when people come in and say, you can't do that, it's just completely baffling to me. It's like missing the point of literature completely. It's like these people have never read a book before, which, I'm sure they have. That's the problem. So the point is I don't think it is possible to be original. It's certainly true that any alien you make up is going to be, and this is a big problem with world building, right? It's like my world building is I'm trying to set them up, right? So anything that I could possibly make up is something a human being might be capable of, because I'm capable of imagining it. And make them more depraved than human imagination.
Great.
Jordan,
he's you're a little frozen, Christopher. I think your point is that
on my end too.
Deep roots can't be reached by the frost. Isn't that the line from Lord of the Rings? What is it? Deep roots can't be reached by the frost or something like that. So I wanted to switch over to you. Did you have something to add, Austin?
Yeah, no, I was going to say I was having an issue. Rockio, I think, was coming out on our end too.
Yeah,
that wasn't just your end.
Okay.
So I was saying, Christopher, you were choppy for past minute or so. I think we lost you again, but
we lost you for a little bit. You were cutting in and out.
Oh, darn. Yeah, there was a bad storm here earlier, so there's probably just some weirdness.
Yeah, but I did have something to add because
Am I
Jordan,
back now?
You're back.
I'll
back.
log, see if that helps.
Yep. Okay. Jordan, I was asking because you are you said you teach philosophy and what at active, and what was the other, English as well? Or
I teach AP language, so it's like rhetoric, logic, arguments, that kind of thing. Sweet. And then I teach philosophy and fantasy and sci-fi, and I teach a film course as well. So I do a bunch of things there for like high school juniors and seniors. Yeah.
I'm super curious while having you and Rockio here, because you brought up empiricism. My very bland amateur understanding of empiricism is there's impressions and then ideas, and you take the impression of something and all your ideas are just combinations of impressions. And I forget who wrote this essay or who this was by. Probably David Hume. He does everything. But they're like, whichever philosopher was writing this, where he said, come up with one counterexample to this to disprove empiricism, to prove that I'm wrong. And then I think later in the essay, gives an example and says, but this one doesn't count, or something like that. Toro, it was pretty funny because he used the example of two different colors. Of you get the impression of yellow, an impression of a darker yellow, and you can come up with the idea of a yellow in between that without having seen a yellow of that sort. So you're not just combining to make up a creature. For example, would be you have a deer and you have a unicorn. What about, or no, a deer and you have I don't know how you come up with the unicorn is you take up a rhino and you take up a pony,
horse,
and then you can create unicorn because you've seen horn, you've seen that, and therefore your idea comes from that. But I guess so that's my understanding of it. So
your understanding is almost perfect.
Okay.
Locke starts it out with the idea of simple sensations. You got to remember, these guys were trying to create a almost Newtonian system of the mind. So in the same way that objects that are extended in space, so like matter, that you might have a physics of like atoms, people like Locke and Hume and Kant were trying to understand the atoms of thought. And so Locke thought that, can I find the basic fundamental constituent, not of matter, but of thought? And he thought that was simple sensations. So for Locke, a simple sensation was like hardness. Like, I feel this desk and it's hard. I look at the desk and it's white. You can measure the desk and it actually has a size, and those were simple sensations, and those are your perceptions. Hume called those impressions, fundamental impressions. They all have different words for it and things like that. Locke called Hume called these impressions and ideas. Locke called them ideas, understanding, and things like that. So they all have different words.
Synonyms, right?
Yeah, the basic idea is that all knowledge is made up of these simple building blocks of these very simple sensations. So when you have something like a unicorn, you have whiteness, you have the feeling of the fur, you have all these simple sensations that come into your mind as sense data, and you basically use comparison, abstraction, contiguity, all these different things to mix and match them and create these complex ideas. This is where the empiricists thought that we got our abstract ideas. The idea behind all of that, Austin, is the empiricists thought that you could create, and again, Christopher would not be in love with this idea. It's very much tending towards scientism. The empiricists believe that you could create a kind of physics of the mind where you could figure out whether or not an abstraction was true. So take a word that we all disagree on. When I say the word democracy, if I asked you, Austin, what democracy means, and Richard and Christopher, you would not give me the same definition, right?
Rich and I we would say cringe, right?
Cringe, yeah.
Right.
The definition of democracy is cringe.
Yeah. And I would say cringe. And like, if I asked you, like, okay, what are natural rights? Right. If you ask someone what freedom is, a liberal will say, okay, it's positive rights. A libertarian will say it's negative rights. A conservative will say, we'll use the classic definition. It's freedom to do what you ought. Right. It's actually freedom is to be found in boundaries and constraints, whatever. We're all going to have different definitions. Well, the empiricists were epistemological optimists. They literally believed that you could trace complex ideas back to their simple sensations. So Hume actually used the idea of a unicorn, and he said that is an example of a false abstraction. And you can figure out by tracing it all the way back to simple sensations where the idea went wrong. And it's exactly as you said. It's that you took a horn and you put it on a horse where a horn doesn't belong. And that's a kind of epistemological optimism that I think they took it too far and things like that. But I always think it's interesting to apply kind of that idea to creativity and stuff like that. But I'm impressed that you know those ideas down to the level of detail that you do, Austin. That's impressive.
Oh, that is just my surface level. I have not read what it's based on quite yet, which Rich and I need to do a lot more of that. We want to start diving into that stuff. But that was my understanding of it, because then to take that question to that next step, I got to ask that, Rocky, that obviously from the Christian perspective, and what is your what's your counter example, or like why you don't believe that is the answer to all things? And also for you as well, Jordan, I know you said you think they took it too far. I'm just curious to learn what do you guys think about it as a philosophy, or is that the right? Is it a philosophy or
yeah, it is a philosophy, and I'll say really quickly, I just don't think that you can take an abstraction like, democracy or freedom or the McDonald's Corporation or any of these big abstractions, take an abstract notion like love. I don't think you can reduce that down to concrete, simple impressions or simple sensations. Depends if you want to use Locke or Hume's terminology. Their claim was that you could figure out if your definition of democracy was right or wrong by tracing it all the way back to, so like, I'll give you an example, just get really basic with it. Hume said, okay, you have, picture in your mind right now an apple. Okay, well, in order to know whether or not your complex idea of an apple is correct, we have to trace all the way back to your simple sensations. And this goes all the way back to when you're like a child. And for the first time you see an apple. Well, someone like Hume would say, you don't actually see a full apple. What you see when you're a little kid and you have this flow of experience and you have no rational understanding is you see a Granny Smith apple. You see green, you see hardness, you see a little brown at the top, you see, and then you bite into it and you experience tartness. And so the idea is that you put all those things together, and that's the first apple that you've experienced. And you ask your mommy, like, what is that? And mom says, that's an apple. And then you see another apple and it's red and it looks totally different. And then basically you add up all the things that they have in common and subtract the things that are different. And you end up with this notion of an abstract apple. The epistemology, the empiricists thought that
the problem with this, right, is that you can't do
Darn it. We lost you again. No, I want to hear that. What'd you say?
Sorry, it was lagging and I thought there was a pause.
No, I'm trying.
Go ahead.
We lost you there for a second.
Man, let's see if I just...
We had the Rockio hand race. You're about to go in.
I can hear you.
The camera off and see if the bandwidth issue.
We could hear you with the camera off. That was working.
Okay, yeah. So I'll bring the hands back for you, Austin.
Yes.
Oh, it was? Okay. Well, maybe we'll do that for a bit. We had a thunderstorm and it is stealing mine. So anyway. Yeah, no, you can't really do that though. And Jordan, I didn't mean to jump on you. It was lagging and there was like a pause, and I thought that there was
we're agreeing, Christopher. My point is you can do that with an apple, but you can't.
Yeah, I know we're agreeing, right? But you can't even.
Darn it!
Really do right now. And what is like?
Losing it.
We're losing you, man. We're losing you.
Very striking about children is they don't look at objects. No.
We heard that.
Try to log back in, okay?
Okay. I gotta know what he has to say. I mean, he did say earlier he doesn't like to he gives away the ending so you could focus, but I don't know where he's going with it yet. Well, actually, that's not true. I know he disagrees, so that he's building us through why he does. So I am hooked.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely falls along the. I could see someone agreeing with the idea of, the atomization or the atomization of thought. Eventually, it also kind of being side by side with a nihilist, the nihilist view on like emotions and trying to atomize feelings of love, of like the common
right.
Like if you ask a nihilist on what they think of love is, and it's like, oh, those are just chemicals in the brain that tell you to breed, and it's like, no, it's not like it. That's I see that line of thought definitely leading toward just the abstract, where you just abstract it so far to the removal of a soul, which is effectively, I think, like it's basically removing the thing that makes us human, the things that makes us
and people do that
rather than just moving.
Exactly. And people do that with human nature too, right? I have students in my, philosophy classes who will say, oh, come on, Mr. Hill, all of these abstractions, what people really are is we're these meatballs, where these bags of chemicals and flesh just bumping into each other on a barren rock in a corner of an indifferent universe. And I mean, it's just so shallow, and it's just so lacking in originality. I mean, even someone like Carl Sagan, who was a man of science, said that human life is profoundly precious and important because, and Christopher is going to cringe right now, but that's okay. I like to make Christopher cringe. Carl Sagan said that we are the cosmos becoming aware of itself. And that's why we're important. We are an example of matter coming to life and becoming metacognitive and thinking about like why we're here and why we exist and what we want in life and things like that. Christopher is cringing like mad. Go ahead and jump in, Christopher.
Right, because why does that matter, Carl? Why does it matter? Why does it matter that the atoms are aware of themselves? I don't understand. Answer.
I agree with you,
Carl.
I was trying to build a
know.
bridge,
I mean,
man.
You're winding me up, and it's working. But to get back to the Apple, hopefully the signal's working now. And then Moved by Truth is like, what happened to this interview is a good question. We should maybe get back to fantasy, but not that we really strayed too far, right? Is that like you can't really reduce these things to simple sensations, right? Because that's not what your brain sees. Your brain sees utility, right? When my daughter sees an apple, right? An apple is actually a round food, right? She sees how to interact with it spatially, right? How to grab it and then what to do with it. This is true. Like the minute she sees a cup, like all she does is get a spoon or a small object and put it in the cup and take it out.
Well, she shapes her hand into the form of a cup.
She understands what a cup is. Put water
automatically.
In, scoop water, pour water. Right. So what you see, right, isn't reality. You see how to interact with reality. Right.
Well, I mean, that's
Right?
you're getting
and so
into. Sorry, I thought the lag was a break.
And it's still cutting out, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, you're there's a lag, and you were talking about functionalism and how we actually see in terms of our own utility. But Christopher, a secular person would say that is you seeing.
It's so obvious when you see small children interacting with the world that, like, clearly David Hume never met a baby, right? I mean, just never. It's so pathetic. Get out of here, David Hume. I have no time.
Oh, what
no,
were you say, Jordan?
you're
You were
getting
going to talk about what a secular would say to that.
I was going to say that a secular person would say that we see things functionally because of our evolutionary imperatives. That that is the reason why we see the world in terms of the functional tasks we need to accomplish. I'm on your side. I'm playing devil's advocate, Christopher, but I'm on your side. The point that you're making is very true and profound, and it's why we're having a hard time actually building robots. To your point, is because it's very difficult to model that.
They can't see objects the way that we do.
Yeah, exactly. But you're lagging again.
For a long time. I mean, they still can't do it great, right? They can't pick out an object from background, right? That's why CAPTCHAs work, right? Whereas it's very clear there's an apple on the table. They just they just see green, right? Brown, right? So like you're right. Like maybe this just proves that like evolution is selecting for X and Y, and I'm fine with evolution. But it at least disproves the simple sensation thing, right? There's something else going on, right? We might just be a meatball. I'm open to the possibility from a philosophical standpoint, but we don't act like meatballs, and so I don't intend to live my life acting like one. And like people who say that we're just matter anyway, don't act like meatballs either, because they get real aghast at evils like genocide and racism and things. They get real upset, right? And if we are just meatballs, none of that matters. Nothing matters, right?
Well, if we're just meatballs, there's no free will, and you're not choosing anything.
Right, and there is no genocide, right? It's just some atoms are turning into other atoms. or the atoms are moving, and the meatballs are becoming spaghetti. It doesn't, and no one acts like that, right? And if they do, they should be at Arkham Asylum. So I don't intend to live my life that way, and it's much better to try and get back to it, like to live in a story. And like most people historically have lived in stories anyway. And like it may be better if your story has dragons in it than if it doesn't. Because you're gonna probably interact with something that's basically a dragon anyway, so why not? And there we go. I brought us back around. No.
I'm being annoying today, Christopher. Real quick, and then we're going to get to the 4toRamble guys right now.
This is great.
No.
This
Give
is
me,
great.
give me
Keep
1
going.
second.
Keep going. Go.
You came
you?
here to listen to
I'm being-
Rockio, not talk. That's why we're here.
I'm
Jordan, your
trying-
philosophy background as well. Like I'm invested. Keep going.
Yeah.
Christopher, aren't you committing? I'm gonna be the annoying, actually fedora tipping secular guy, keyboard warrior, and ask you if you're committing appeal to consequence fallacy, which is the fallacy of saying that because I don't like the consequences of something, therefore it's not happening. So a good example of this is in the Matrix when Morpheus says, "Do you believe in fate, Neo?" And Neo says, "No, because I don't like the thought that I'm not in control of my life." That's appeal to consequence fallacy. Either fate is or isn't real, and it doesn't depend on how Neo feels about whether or not he has control over his life. He either does or doesn't have control over his life, and whether or not fate is real. People do this with God too, which is very insulting to God, is they'll say that God must exist because if he didn't, I'd be depressed. And it's like, that makes a mockery of God, right? Because the idea that whether or not God exists depends on how you feel about it is very insulting. I always thought God was more transcendent than that, and I'm a believer. What say you to my petulant challenge?
No, I mean, it's not a petulant challenge, right? It is an important rejoinder. However, right, you have to make choices, right? And like, if your choice is choose to assume that everything matters a lot or that nothing matters ever, right? Actually, that choice has real consequences, right? It isn't arbitrary, right? And in the same way, like, you want to talk about slave moralities, Nietzsche, that's much worse than Christianity, right? Because then nothing is your fault ever, right? And you might be able to make things happen by propitiating certain powers, as the Greeks and Romans did, but it might be better to assume that you are responsible for your own actions, because like your outcomes might be better, right? And I'm not asking anyone to believe in God when I say this, right? But that is one of the differences between the Christian and pagan worldviews, right? The pagans did not believe that human beings had free will. And if you did, you were some kind of demigod, right? So Alexander had free will, you not so much, right? And so you have to make a choice, right? And like, it is probably better, your outcomes will be better. You will be happier even if you are miserable, right? If you choose to believe that things matter, right? And almost everybody has lived in some kind of story, even if that story is the fates are in charge and it doesn't matter, right? Then like people are like, well, we don't have any kind of story, right? Like, it's very clear that our civilization is lacking for want of a story to live in. I think that's a lot of the reason. I think this is the real reason a lot of people read science fiction and fantasy, is they're looking for a story to live in. And if you look at the way so many people will become, right, a fan of something, right, which, remind everyone, the root word of fan is fanatic, right? A fanatic for, right, Middle Earth or Roshar or Arrakis or whatever, and for the ideas put out by fiction writers, right? What science fiction and fantasy is offering is two authors synthetic mythology, right? For you to adopt or not adopt, if you're not simply enjoying it, right? This is where the whole meme of like, actually, I'm a science fiction enjoyer comes from, because I'm not, making a religion out of it. And so I do think that it satisfies for a lot of people a mythological need for a story to inhabit. I think that's another thing that people get out of this. I don't know that it's a good thing. I think there are because I think that I think that if it's just something, because I made one of those up, you know, if somebody was like, I'm organizing my life around Hadrian Marlowe's writings now, I'm like, maybe don't. It's just me, just a guy. Wrote a story about some aliens and some space Romans because thought it was cool. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, sorry, Allison.
I need to tear down my dream wall.
You know, it is important to remember, right, that it's not a replacement for like for meaning, right? You know, although it can be a means of pointing to meaning, fantasy.
All right, so I will
yeah,
not
I'm glad that
come
the
back
signal
at you
seems to
from
be
the
working a little bit
perspective
better.
of Nietzsche.
That's good.
I will not do that. I could do that, but I will not do that because I want to ask the gentlemen, Austin and Richard.
I'll pull his mustache off. I will.
So we've thought about why we're drawn to science fiction and fantasy. I asked you guys why you gravitate toward it, why you're pulled toward it, what it does for us. And so what would you say that you look for in these genres? You guys are important booktubers at this point. You have a lot of people following you. You have a big book club. And so I'm wondering almost how you choose the books that you read and the books that you hold up and venerate and give 5 stars to. And so that's the what I've called this discussion is what makes for great fantasy and sci-fi. Let's start with fantasy. What makes for great fantasy for you guys? And if that feels too difficult, I can bring it down to earth and ask you guys, what do you want to see in a fantasy novel or world or series when you're in love with a fantasy novel? What's it doing well, Richard and Austin?
For fantasy specifically, when I know a fantasy is done well for me I don't think this is not all a fantasy story needs, but for me to consider it great, I kind of look for the feeling that there is a history. And often when a fantasy story falls flat for me is at least there's a difference between on the page where the author is telling you a history of like, yes, this happened 100 years ago. There's a very different thing with how Tolkien masterfully does better than basically everyone else is you feel there's a history to this world and that history allows you to believe that it is. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in a fantasy series, that like if it can do that, if it can make me believe that not only was there a past where there were past significant stories, not just events that are irrelevant to today's story, and that there will be because if there was a real past, then there is a real future, and then there is a real alternate present, that other things are also going on that are also completely relevant, but we're not following that right now. That encompasses, and all of that becomes real if I feel like the history is real. That's what I'm looking for in a fantasy.
Yeah, I think that with sorry for a cop out of mentioning both fantasy and sci-fi, because you can do this in both, of course, but not going back to the philosophy talk, just talking about fantasy. However, it's related in the sense that I think we all are trying to look for something true that feels true, whether it's to your, if you want to go the secular route, to your subjective experience, or whether it's to an actual truth and getting closer to what is objective. And I think when you're reading something, whether it's the world of fantasy, the message that you take away, how you emotionally feel about it. Rich and I, when we break down and give our reviews, we think everything's by the number. So we look at 6 categories, and this is just how we break down our reviews to try to talk about everything in a book. We go emotional impact. How did you feel? Thought provoking. What were the themes, the messages, the characters, the plot, the world, the prose? And a book doesn't have to do all those things to be a great fantasy book. It certainly can just do one of those and it could floor you. And it does one of those in a way that moves you or strikes you. And that element is what can make a great fantasy book. Some of our favorites do several of those to the highest degree. But I think that's part of what it is. When you're reading that book, it speaks to some true experience that you have, or better yet, an experience you obviously haven't had, because these are characters that have done fantastical things, although they're more relatable than you'd think. It's just what would a human like you do in this situation? What would a human unlike you do in this situation. So I think that's a lot of it as well. And Rich is definitely right about when you feel a world's real, there's more to it. There's a history to it. I also agree with all that.
Bye, John.
Oh, John's like, bye, John. It could be Jacob. You never know. Poor Jacob never gets a shout out. Yeah.
Throughout this talk, I'm wondering if a previous question we had here during that you asked was why? Why do we read fantasy? Why do people like fantasy? And maybe the answer to it is when you read fantasy, you get to learn, you get to see and learn how to see the story in your own life. That reality can be so muddy that you don't actually see that you're in a story. And then when you read a fantasy novel, it helps you out better able to see the story of your own life.
You know, I do think there is sort of a step one, right, where people do. So like we've done, like we've come through Jordan Philosophy Land, and we're down in the lower stratum now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is just cool, right? Right, like on the basic level, right? This is almost an aesthetic argument, Jordan, right? Like it's cool. You have castles, and you have more than castles. You have giant castles. You have castles that are bigger and like more involuted and complicated than ever have existed and could ever exist, right? There are battles with armies, you know, more numerous than had been seen on Earth, right? You know, on a single field in a long time, right? 100 years at least, probably more like 2000, right? You know, just everything's so big and cool, right? You've got knights and castles. That's romantic, right? In both senses of the term, right? And I think that has an appeal all its own, right? And I think that people read, in part because there's something about that, a world that looks like that feels like that obviously is more exciting, but also, as you were saying, like feels more like a world we want to be in, even if it's a worse world, right? Because things are more obvious. The way people were talking about it, it's like it's clear what your path is, what your purpose is. I would submit to those people, right, that actually your life can have an arc and does. You will die. There is an ending, right? And what that ending looks like is not entirely up to you, but it is up to you somewhat. And so these stories are sort of guideposts for thinking about that in the same way that maybe your culture's sacred tradition is, right? Because largely those are stories as well, true or not, right? That are sort of orienting you towards these same questions. But that sort of aesthetic thing draws you in, right? It's cool. Like, I like this thing, right? The problem I have is when that's all a fantasy book is offering you. And this is one of the things that's disenchanted me is, you know, we've all seen I'm sure the video of the guy sort of, spoofing Brandon Sanderson fans asking questions. And it's like, I am like a level 40 amber goblin or whatever. I don't know, right? Like Spren, is that a word?
I have not seen this. What is this?
Oh, some guy is like, what? Okay, so like if I like, how much tin do I need to fly, right? Like if I eat a bunch of rocks, right? And you know, Brandon says like, go on. I think that is an interesting question, and you might have to read the next story to find out, right? Like people do like to read. I think a lot of the appeal to hard magic, which everybody here knows, I don't like, right, is that you, the reader, then can find out novel applications for the magic system, right? And so then you are a wizard, right? You would be a good wizard if this world was real, and that makes you feel powerful is a lame word, right? But like it does give you something, right? It makes you have the sense, not only, right, am I going on an adventure, but I would be good at it.
You'd be a great airbender or what?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because I came up with this really edgy case for how I would use rock eating, right? You know, and the problem with this is it's useless, right? Because you can't actually like get magic by injecting a bunch of lead. You will die, actually. And so those lessons, right, are not the useful things that you get from fantasy books. And so I do like look for the book to say something about being human, right? Beyond the sort of like aesthetic stuff. Now you can like learn a bunch of other sort of lower things, right? If the if the writer, for example, like really knows their architecture or something, you can like learn what that thing in a building is called, or how sword fighting really actually works, right? Or about horses. Like I know very little about horses, but you can learn a lot about horses from fantasy writers who do. And so you can pick up all sorts of stuff like that that's sort of useful, even if only as trivia, right? Of course, the problem is then you have to like make sure that's not a thing that they made up, because a lot of people do get their history lessons from George R.R. Martin, and that can be, Jordan, we've talked about this. That drives me crazy. You know, so there is a lot of stuff that you can pick up that's sort of a like hard magic factoid, right? If it's about something that is real, but like people don't really, they're not going for that. They're going for like, you know, they're going for the magic, right? And all of that is not really helpful. And so I've always thought that like magic in fantasy should operate on a level of meaning, right? And that the magic should, and this is a thing that stuck out to me last time I read Tolkien, right? Is Middle Earth just is magical, right? There's no system, obviously, right? It predates the idea of a magic system anyway. And so to apply the idea of magic systems right onto Tolkien is anachronistic. It's, you know, it's like calling Shakespeare a feminist. Like there was no feminism. He can't be one. It doesn't exist yet. But like Middle Earth just is magical. Like every place they go, like there's something supernatural about it that has an impact on the story in some way that means something. You know, like people like to, you know, make fun of Tom Bombadil, but the Old Forest is amazing, right? Because the Old Forest is a real place, right? In the sense that it is a character in the story far more than almost any other forest in any fantasy book I've ever read, right? Like it has an atmosphere and a character to it because it is alive and it is intentional. And it acts as a place in a way that places don't usually act in fantasy anymore. And that was just really striking to me the last time I read Lord of the Rings. And I don't just like that as like an aesthetic thing. Like it's cool that the trees are foreboding and they don't like hobbits because hobbits cut them down sometimes, right? And so this willow is going to squish them, right? It's cool. Like that's just fun. But it means something, right? It means something about the relationship between civilization and nature. It means something about well, really about that, right? That's the sort of the big thing. It means something. And just how much, you know, energy you need to channel Fireball is not meaningful at all. And so if your fantasy book is only interesting because you have a novel magic system based on cheese, there's no point in reading it because like I can't learn anything from your cheese-based magic system that's going to change my life as much as I love cheese. So
you are in the camp of you read to also learn. Do you ever pick up a book? Maybe it's changed over time. Have you ever picked up a book just for the fun of it?
Sure. Exclusively as a kid.
Exclusively,
right? Yeah, exclusively for the fun of it, or because the cover looked cool, right? I picked up Dune because of the Arthur C. Clarke blurb. He compared it to Lord of the Rings, and I was like, all right, but in space. Very funny blurb considering Tolkien's disposition towards Dune. Very increasingly funny. Has not aged well. But like of course, right? Like I almost only pick up something because it looks cool, right? But then I will put it down if it's lame, actually, right? And I'll put things down very quick, especially books. Like I very often, you know, I mean, I think it's normal to not leave the store with a book that you've looked at, right? But in a couple of pages, I know, like, nah, don't want to read this. Nothing for me here. And like, really, that's, I think, just because as I've gotten older, like time becomes a lot more valuable. Not that I'm like super old, but like when you're 12, like you have infinite time in a way that you will never, ever, 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 ever have again. Right.
Yeah. Well,
and so I could just sit through, you know, and read a book and read 4 books. And like, I heard it gets good, but I'm just not seeing it. I can't do that anymore. I don't even have time to read the Wheel of Time, period. Right. Like, I don't know when that's happening. That's just way
There's a lot of time.
But like when I was a kid, I was like, I'm going to watch all of Doctor Who. And I like did at the time because I had it. Right. And there was like a lot of garbage that I had to suffer through to do that. You know, but but it was worth it for the things that were good. But it wouldn't be worth it now. So
Counterpoint to you, counterpoint to you, Christopher. Austin did not like your first book.
true.
And if he was following your philosophy, he wouldn't pick up the second and wouldn't become a fan. We realize how many different series of like where a book one is just, it's not enough, and like how there's so many of my favorite series now. It's like I got it.
Well, to the point though, Rich, my time's less valuable. So
that's fair.
So I had the time
that would be funny.
To do one more, and then therefore.
So when you're a child, you're allowed to give a series, 5 books before you get it, and then as your time becomes more valuable, it just shrinks. And so,
I mean, maybe. I mean, at least that was true for me, right? Look, I don't fault anybody for saying, "Hey, I didn't like Empire of Silence. I'm out." Right? It makes me sad because I want everybody who reads the book to be like, "This is great. I love it." Right? I didn't waste any time at all. But people are different, right? And now some people are different because they're different, and some people are different because they're wrong, and it's fine. Maybe it's their loss. I don't know. But like, joking aside, right? Like, it is like, it's your time, right? And it is like up to you, to determine how you're going to spend it. I think people who don't like reading at all are weird, right? But like, they don't have to do it. It's not mandatory that you read books as much as we like to imagine that it is. Most people still don't read. I'll pick on my dad because he's not here, and John's not here either because my dad watches BookTube, but he doesn't read fiction beyond my books at all. I don't know why. Like, he just is like, they're gonna mention Christopher at some point. He's a big John fan. Is very strange to me, but he does. And he's like, "Hey, did you see there's a new review of your book?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't actually. Thank you." Right? But like, my dad, like, he's too busy. He like builds. He built an entire Model A Ford out of spare parts that he bought one at a time off eBay over the course of several years. He built a whole truck. It doesn't have a VIN number because it never existed. It is not an original car, right? My dad has a scale steam locomotive that works like a full-size steam locomotive, right? That he built when he was like 20. Like, my dad built every room in our house, rebuilt every room in our house. He doubled the size of our house when we were growing up. He, like, literally, if this old house were a human being, it's my dad. But he doesn't read fiction. When is he gonna? He doesn't have time. He has trains to build. Swimming pools.
How helpful is fiction to the passions of his life?
Not
doesn't
terribly.
Seem to be it doesn't seem to be as useful for his passions.
He's certainly no poorer for it, right? Although the funny thing about people who barely read, when they do read something, right, inevitably it's like, "Oh, this could be a movie," right? My dad is always like, "Yeah, but they would be great movies," and I'm like, almost all of them would, actually. Let me tell you about Hyperion, right? So I was thinking this week, I was like, man, we really like missed a turn in this universe, and with having David Lynch do Dune. He should have done New Sun. That's like perfect for him, actually, in a way that Dune isn't. But here we are, stuck in stupid reality. So,
this is the perfect place then to inject the most awkward question of all, which is, I wasn't even going to mention this. I didn't even think to mention this, but unlike you, Christopher, I think you're probably just as concerned about it as I am. I am seeing a worrying decline in reading, and there was a YouGov poll that came out at the end of 2023, that showed a marked decline in reading. That the average American had read one book that year. What's interesting is that the reading market is the same. So as the population has gone up, reading has gone down, but the same number of people are reading. So the audience is the same that it's long been, but the percentage of the population that is regularly reading has declined, and men really aren't reading anymore. Do you think that's a consequence of the market not appealing to men, and there not being an avenue for people to write fiction that men enjoy? Or is it more, is it that men need to get their act together? And you did used to see that the average man would read, that the front porch republic, the ordinary middle class person would read. You watch episodes of Mad Men, and ordinary ad executives are getting articles published in the Atlantic because they're passionate and they're reading and they're writing. A lot of the guys I know now are just gambling on sports. And I go to a picnic and get together with, I have a bunch of friends, and I'm the only one at the picnic, the only guy there that reads. And it's a little bit alienating. And I want to talk about books, and they want to talk about fantasy football. And what do you guys make of that? Is that something that you guys have seen in your lives? Or am I crazy? Is that something I'm imagining?
I mean,
go ahead, Rich. Yeah.
In our lives personally, so Austin and I, we're a part of like a fairly big friend group in college that we still hang out with today. And basically everyone in the friend group is big college football fans. We became friends over our love of poker and gambling. And yeah, it's basically
based. Awesome. Yeah.
So, however, Austin and I started reading a lot more. We've gotten a couple of our friends, like a few of them have started reading more, and I'm happy for it. But yeah, a large majority just don't read as often. But
I mean, the one thing the
biggest one, Rich, it's time.
But Rich, you have gotten several of them to read.
I know. I'm really happy with, especially our friend Justin has started reading a lot more recently, and I think it's at least he told me the reason why he's been reading a lot more is I've been kind of bang on with my or like at least our recommendations to him, that like he's had like 5 books in a row or something that he just absolutely loved, and so he's just, the snowball keeps growing. That's
noble work. That's impressive.
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to with this, Jordan, which is, par for the course, eh? So like I do not despair for the future of reading in America at this moment that much, right? It does seem to me that even if the percentage is declining, I think the absolute numbers may be going up. And I am heartened, weirdly, right? By sort of the booktube thing, and it's probably TikTok more than it is YouTube, driving people to read more, and even if that reading is more mimetic and it's more sort of fad driven. There's famously bad take by another writer, and everyone knows who it is, but I'm not trying to pick on her. Talking about how Tolkien had too much space in Barnes and Noble, right? This is a very bad take, because people go to Barnes and Noble to pick up Lord of the Rings, right? They go to Barnes and Noble to pick up, classical literature or a toy or whatever, and not all of them, right? But some of the people who go in will also grab another book, right? They'll at least be exposed to other books. So during 2020, when nobody was going outside, I'm trying to be careful for YouTube, I don't know if they're still litigious about this. My sales collapsed completely. I bottomed out. I sold like 20 books in a week. And I had the first 3 books out. Poor Demon in White came out in July of 2020. And like immediately sold nothing. Like I had pre-orders and that was it for the longest time. It was, didn't look like I was going to make it, let's say. Fortunately Mike came along at the end of 2020 or maybe end of 21 and started to turn things around for me here on YouTube, right? But if you look around, everybody's like, lockdown was great for reading, right? Like all these people were reading books. They were reading books they'd already heard about. They were reading Stephen King finally because they had time. They were reading Brandon Sanderson because they had time. They were reading George Martin because they had time, right? They weren't looking for new writers. And so people like me, right, and even worse, the poor writers who debuted during that summer in particular, were dead on arrival, right? And so there was something to the bookstore experience that was actually helping, even though the conversation on the internet is that bookstores are moribund and like it's just a matter of time before everything is Amazon, right? Everything isn't Amazon because the conversation, right? As much as like, look, indie is great, right? I'm not knocking indie writers; they do some amazing work. Some of them are bad. This is true of traditionally published writers too. There's a lot of traditionally published nonsense. It doesn't matter, right? But the conversation is still driven by traditional publishing, at least on a title by title basis. The trends, I think, are very clearly set by indie. And publishing is traditional publishing is scrambling to keep up with the trends, right? Romantasy is largely following this sort of like erotic fantasy wave that had been happening in independent publishing for the last several years. That's kind of dying out over there. The funny thing is, it's only just starting in traditional publishing now, right? And it is a bubble, and it will normalize. It will drop off, right? But it still will sell a lot because romance has always sold a lot because most readers are women, and romance is broadly targeted at women, right? Almost exclusively, right? And like that's fine, right? I have moral objections to pornography, but not all of those books are that. I don't know, on a case by case basis, which is and which isn't, but whatever. It does create readers. And to the extent that that sphere is converging with the normal fantasy sphere, actually might be good for fantasy that is not romance fantasy, right? Because it creates an appetite for fantasy literature, period. And people, once they try a kind of literature, are more willing to try the thing that's the next step over. And that's good in the same way that going into the store to pick up Tolkien is good for writers like me and the lady with that tweet, right? And so that's all good. It's good that Book Talk is driving these sort of mimetic book purchases, right? It's good that traditional publishing is getting interested in these sort of like, they're not really special editions, but these like plus ultra hardcovers with the, I think sprayed edges are tacky, but people love them. Those things. It's good that they're doing that, right? Because then you can get people into stores. And even if that's probably going to prove in the long term to have been comparable to like the variant cover speculation boom in comic books, if there are 4 versions of a book out, some people are going to buy them 4 times, and that's good for authors. And things being good for authors is good for readers long term because then the author is comfortable enough to be an author, financially speaking, right? So like all of that is good, right? Barnes & Noble opening 60 new stores in America in the next couple of years is good, right? Even if, they're mostly doing so off the success of books that I'm not interested in reading, because there being more readers, right? Period, is good for me long term. And publishing is a long term game, right? Publishers don't really think of it that way. They think about launch week and the New York Times list like it's the box office. But my success, as people may have noticed, has been cumulative. It has been gradual, and that is a much surer bet. And publishing is gambling, 100%, right? It's a much surer bet for things to be sort of slower. So I'm encouraged generally. Now, the whole like men reading thing is a different conversation, but I think I've pontificated long enough on at least one thing. So I'll stop. So.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jordan.
Oh no, I was going to respond to this and say that sure, Britton from Some Okie Dude, my good buddy here, that might be the case. It might be the case that a lot of the conversations people are having about men not reading are disingenuous, but the quote in and of itself that men aren't reading is factually true, that women dominate that space. And part of it might be that, I mean, if you want to get technical about it, women score higher on IQ tests for reading. They're better readers. They are better at solving math word problems than men are, and things like that. So part of it might, and part of it might be environmental, but I want men to read more. I've got a big poster in my classroom that says "Real Men Read," and it's a father with his son, reading to his son. And I believe that the reading is for everyone. So I do see it as a problem, but I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of disingenuous conversation on BookTube Britain, so I don't doubt that at all. Guys, I had a question for 4toRamble guys here. I've been watching a lot of your content recently. This is a little bit of a topic shift here, but I had to ask you. you guys have the big Wheel of Time set in the background. I see it right there, Richard, and you guys. I never I got really into that. I read the first book. I read Eye of the World. I enjoyed it, and I never made it past the beginning of book 2. I was wondering if you guys could give me a little pitch for that, because I don't know. I don't want to insult it too much. I don't want to alienate you guys, but I had a hard time really getting into it as something that it wasn't just the slog. It wasn't just my hesitation to read a gargantuan series that people say is almost not worth reading for like 3 or 4 books. I'd have to experience that for myself. I don't know if those people are right when they say that there's a slog that is just incredibly arduous and almost painful. Maybe that's not true. But what I found is that I couldn't tell the characters apart. I'm going to ignore the fact that the first book was derivative of Tolkien. I know how cliche that is, and that sort of thing. But I had a hard time getting into it, and I like big, chunky, epic fantasy books, and I liked a lot of the ideas, and I liked how he was incorporating Eastern philosophy and Taoism and that kind of thing. But I could never get into Robert Jordan. What is it that you guys find enjoyable, profound, satisfying?
Yeah, no. Austin is also, ignorant on the glory of the Wheel of Time. I and yet we're still friends. It's amazing the grace that I show him. But no, in serious, in reference to a slog, personally, no, there is no slog. There isn't. There's a plot line that should have been one book, but it carries on into the second half of the next book. Like that plot line, too long. That's generally where people find the slog. I can understand it being like if people were reading it, that specifically happening where you read the book and then you have to wait over a year to read the next. And then it's a continuation of the plot that probably should have just ended in the previous one. I get that. I didn't read it that way because I just read all the way through it. No slog to me. The thing that is, so if you get past, if you're okay with it being, not wholly original, which we've had the whole conversation, nothing's original. It is Tolkien and it's Middle Earth and Dune. Lord of the Rings, Dune combined together. And the big draw for the series, of course, with any kind of long series is the characters. And what I find a little bit more unique, or at least more fun for me on the enjoyment factor, is these characters are not smart, not particularly, and they don't learn their lessons well. They are wrong. Better people, better, smarter, more efficient people. This book series could have been 3 books, could have been a trilogy, but humans kind of suck. Humans can get in their own way. It is a wonderful. I think it tells a wonderful story of gender dynamics and the basic message of men and women can, butt heads and ultimately get in each other's way, or they can complement each other and accomplish amazing things together. But the ultimate thing is the character growth was far more satisfying. When you read, a book with, something happens to a character, they learn their lesson and they change. That's great for a tight story and it's enjoyable. What I liked with the Wheel of Time is characters don't learn their lesson. They have to be taught several times. And at some point you start thinking to yourself, like, is Robert Jordan stretching this? Does he not get it? And then later on you've realized that like it's deliberate. And then another character will come out of the woodwork and say like, what the hell have you been doing? And the character gets a reality check. But to me, the characters felt alive. The world has the history that I love. It feels real. The distance, even just distance between characters of stories and of events happening, change vastly over both time and space. And so even 2 towns over, you hear the rumors, you hear people tell of what they believe is the perception of the world, and it's different. So miscommunication is such a big part of the story, and it feels incredibly fun being at the eagle eye view of it.
That was a good explanation. There's a quote from Harold Bloom from his book, The Western Canon. He says, "He who reads must choose." And by that he meant, if you're going to be reading books, there's only so much time. You can't read everything. You have to pick. You can't be wasting your time. You need to be reading good books. And I guess I got worried. Maybe I watched too much BookTube, but I got worried that I was going to be wasting my time, and that there were so many masterpieces out there of psychological penetration and depth and profundity that that I oughtn't be wasting my time on Robert Jordan. There really wasn't, Richard, tell me honestly, there wasn't any moments when you said, like, am I wasting my time doing this? Should I really be reading these books? I could be reading Anna Karenina, but here I am reading the 6th book of the Wheel of Time series. And no, this isn't just a money grab. This is really like important stuff that he's writing. They're not just wandering through the woods. Like, I'm reading something essential. He's uncovering like truths of reality that are that hit me in the chest. You never felt that way? Because I don't have enough. Nope. I don't have enough experience to say. I could be totally off base, and like maybe this is like the new thing I need to get into. You tell me, Richard.
Well, book 1 for me is my least favorite. I liked it well enough to start book 2, and then I liked that more, and I kept getting into it. Where I became like fully bought into the series of like, oh, this is something special for me was book 4. I enjoyed it all the way through there, but no, Randall Thor is one of the best characters ever written. I personally believe that. It's imagine the best. Actually, Rocky is a cursor. You're good position for this, but the Anakin story, like the Anakin Skywalker story told well, is what Randall Thor is. And it plays with the Chosen One trope, I think, the best that I've read. Yeah, no, I read it in some less than 2 months, because I just read them back to back to back to back, and I loved it.
That's the best pitch for it I've ever heard. Almost everybody is like, we got to worry about, books 5 through 27. Right, when you get to 45, it's great.
If you read book 2 and it's not, and you don't see much of an improvement from book 1, then maybe it's just not for you. That's probably the right way to put it, because book 1 is in that certain spot where Robert Jordan didn't know if he was going to get picked up for the next book, so he wrote it in a way that it could be a standalone where he could carry it. It is the most disconnected, I think, from the series. But after that, sky's the limit.
Austin, did you try reading Wheel of Time and it wasn't for you, or?
Yeah, I gave it to book 4, where that's the one that Rich loves so much to say, hey, if I didn't like book 1, at least get the book 4 to know whether the series for you or not. And I hope you would try it and like it, obviously, because it's not fun to read books and then just leave everyone a curmudgeon. That's one of the series that I would not have continued on the channel, or I was doing it because it's Rich's favorite thing. So I already wasn't into it. And then the series doesn't have a sort of a different trajectory or something with each book that you could like aspects of book 2, 3. It kind of stacks on what's already built upon, as all series do. But this one more so of you have to be invested in these characters at some point. And if you're not, it's just not going to work for you. So I think if you already said you liked book 1 enough, you might like the series as it continues, because the books do get better. I mean, book 3 and 4 are better than 1 and 2. It's just how much do you enjoy the series. And yeah, for me and Rich have a whole thing about it where he gives me a hard time because we haven't continued going into book 5 for the series yet. But yeah, I can't say nothing Rich said is wrong about why he enjoyed it. So it's just, I guess if you're trying to judge based on whether you'd fall into my camp or Rich's to see if it's worth that time investment, is that what it is?
It's similar to Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. I tried the first book, and I didn't understand what was going on at all, and yet there were people screaming in my ears, this series is incredible, it's right up your alley, there's so much depth, you need to have this experience. Get past the first book. It's going to get better in the second book, and if you don't like the second book, the magic happens in the third book. And I don't know. And like, I majored in philosophy. I got another bachelor's degree in English. I've read some hard books. I've read, Malcolm Lowry and James Joyce, and I've read, like Dostoevsky, difficult authors, and Dostoevsky never felt like a slog, and getting through something like Steven Erikson felt like a slog, and yet everyone around me was recommending it. When I fell in love with Mike's book reviews, I was just so impressed that he read all of the Wheel of Time books, and it seemed like he was having such a great time. And we have such similar tastes that I just thought I would really, I would really get into it. I would really enjoy it. And I guess coming from like a philosophy and English background, someone who was reading like John Updike and Philip Roth and like Charles Dickens and stuff like that, and then to like dive into Robert Jordan, I felt like there was character work lacking. I felt like there was what is AP from Critical Dragon call it? He calls it internal focalization. I never feel like I'm really inside of the characters' heads, grappling with their sort of their qualia, their consciousness. It always feels abstract and distant, and like chess pieces are being moved around. And obviously, Richard disagrees with me. And
no, I actually
okay.
agree with you. In many ways, I see the enjoyment of the Wheel of Time. Like, the reason why I'm attached to the characters is almost like a parent looking down at their children making a lot of mistakes. And like, I'm not in their heads in the same way as some other stories, but the fun for me was seeing the frustration of some of these characters. Like, why are you doing this? Oh my God. Look, more than these, the fun of it, the biggest amount of fun is more than every single one of the characters almost at all times.
So dramatic irony. Yeah.
Incredibly so. Yes. Yeah. And that is incredibly enjoyable. The fact that you almost always know more and see where they mess up, and you see often it comes from miscommunication or mistrust, all of these different human dynamics of why ultimately, if people were more honest, if people stopped, people didn't have such big egos, if people were willing to listen, if people were more noble, if people were more virtuous, the Wheel of Time would be maybe a trilogy, maybe a duology,
a pamphlet.
Yeah, but it's a 14 book series because they're human.
Yep.
And
okay.
That's your answer to Martin too, right? Is that you have these characters rushing into disaster, and you know that because of the other point of view characters, but they don't. And then there's this sort of soap operatic, and I don't mean that pejoratively. Soap operas are cool, right? Pain, right, to everything the character is doing. It's like watching a train wreck, right? It's, there is a dramatic merit to that, right? Which is fun. Not something I have because I have one point of view character, but watching the misunderstandings between people is exciting.
And I guess that's your answer, Jordan, for if you feel like Rich does and you're because Rich did feel frustrated at the characters. If you finish and just feel apathetic, if you're not feeling positive or frustration, it's probably not doing the thing for you because
the hard thing is
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, that was the difference with Rich and I. I wasn't frustrated by the characters like you were supposed to be. It was just more of a lack of apathy is the word. So yeah, if you're feeling that by the end of a couple books, then it might not be for you. However, if you're starting to feel that frustration, that's a good sign.
Okay. The hard thing is that being introduced to your channel, I've connected with a lot of what Rich has said. I've felt a kindred spirit through the screen in a lot of his analyses and what he's talked about. I watched your Project Hail Mary video and his enthusiasm for that. And I said, this is a guy, whatever he likes, I'm sure I would like. And so I found myself, okay, he loves Wheel of Time. Could this be, did I mess up on this? Is this something that I screwed up on? Am I not understanding something? It's probably me. So you guys have time for one more topic. I have kind of one more question to ask you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of science fiction, I wanted to turn the question on to science fiction. You guys, Richard and Austin, you guys seem to be open to, for some reason, fantasy is bigger on BookTube than sci-fi is. And I was really inspired by I read Project Hail Mary. I loved it. I thought it was everything that I wanted in sci-fi. It was logical. It was thoughtful. It was kind of like a thriller in space. So it has everything that you would love about a thriller, but it also had aspects of space opera and First Contact and all these other subgenres. I wanted to ask you the same question that I asked about fantasy. We'll start with the 4toRamble guys. And Christopher, you are a sci-fi author, so I want to make room for you too. What do you guys look for in science fiction? What makes for great science fiction, and that sort of thing? And do you plan to do more of it on your channel and that sort of thing?
Austin, you take the first one. I talked first last time.
How funny is this? You have Sun Eater writer here, and let's get to sci-fi. This is
I just watched your Project Hail Mary video, and it was so good.
Oh, yeah, Project Hail Mary is awesome. So, in the answer to what makes good sci-fi in that sense, or okay,
what makes good sci-fi? What's the kind of sci-fi you're thirsting for?
I give a lot more leniency to sci-fi when it comes to. I almost view the genre. Typically, not always, but typically, Project Hail Mary is an exception for one. But typically, characters can matter less. The emotional beats that you get from a fantasy. I guess fantasy can be that more typical storytelling where you're rooting for a character, and you're especially modern fantasy. So I'm generalizing, but with sci-fi, I same thing as fantasy when we're judging a good quality book. But usually a sci-fi book, if it's using its sci-fi nature to bring in a new technology or something that is thought-provoking, something that will make you, that will hit a pulse, or it will just hit a nerve with you on something that you are more ignorant on. When you read sci-fi, sometimes it could seem as if you're reading something that doesn't have much of the fiction to it. Although this stuff is all made believe, they're all could be possible futures, or you can use these absurd situations to. I haven't read yet Three Body Problem, but I've heard Three Body Problem tackles the Fermi's paradox, and I just can't wait to read it because I'm so curious what the answer, what the possible solution to the Fermi's paradox is. So a lot of sci-fi I read to get or to learn something that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten in fantasy. So I think that's some of the advantage of the genres. If you read a fantasy book with the characters don't matter much, they're actually being introduced to Shadow of the Torturer, the character matters very much, but it's not your modern fantasy typical stuff. So I'm already thinking of exceptions, but I guess sci-fi, I give a lot more leniency to just leaning into a question that's being asked. Like, okay, what if this, or put this element into this story, and I'm going to show you a very well thought out essay that's entertaining about this question, or a thought out entertaining way to explore this topic and leave you thinking about it. So I think that makes some great sci-fi.
I think that is the classical answer too, right? Gernsback's sort of idea with his magazine, gosh, amazing, right? I always get amazing and astounding confused.
Yeah,
But
that's
with amazing,
amazing.
right? He was that it would be educational, right? And so if he had a science fiction writer who had any kind of like academic credential at all, he made sure that was like ad forward, right? So that parents would buy the darn magazine for their kids. And they would stretch that as like, thin as it would possibly go. And this sort of like reaches its sort of zenith under Campbell in so-called Golden Age, right? With Asimov and Clark and
Campbell's astounding.
Campbell is astounding. Yeah. And it sort of reaches a zenith there, right? Because like the sort of archetypal Campbellian story, right? He edited like all those guys. Asimov was really his guy, right? And he was very, very heavy-handed, very didactic editor, right? And so he sort of crystallized what science fiction was in the popular consciousness to a degree that it really hadn't been before. Was this, right? It was like, it was the idea story, right? It was the engineer hero. It was maybe it wasn't educational, maybe it was just thought-provoking, right? But it was idea forward. It was technology forward. It was, exploration forward or something, right? Now, those things could be good or bad. Science could be good or bad in the story, right? But the idea was the idea. And those other things were less relevant. You see pushback to that in the 60s with the new wave, right? And since then, it's not really been like that, but this is still, your non-reading family members' opinion of what science fiction is, right? And it's not really wrong, but if you zoom out, though, and you look at all of science fiction, you look at the new wave, right? You look at Dune, you look at Le Guin, you look at Zelazny, and then you look at the later stuff, the sort of 80s space opera, and then the like 90s space opera, which are like kind of actually different things, right? 80s space opera is a lot of women writers, Bujold, Cherry, right? And it's mostly American. 90s is more male, and it is more British, right? And you look at like that's like Ian Banks and stuff like that, and you go into the sort of the modern. And by now we have like everything going on all the time, right? This is true in fantasy too. Every sort of thing that was a period of fantasy history is now just a genre, right? Or a subgenre, and so if you look at all of it, though, not all science fiction is idea-driven, right? A lot of space opera isn't. It's character-driven, right? Bujold is like the best character writer ever, one of the best character writers I've ever read, right? And it's less about the ideas. And in that respect, it maybe more resembles fantasy. But which has sort of led me to the conclusion that it's all the same genre, right? And then we get back to my sense, that it's really about this sort of symbolic relationship with reality and like, what is an alien, right? What is novel technology? What is progress? How do we relate to these things, right? Those are not so different than like, what is a dragon and like, what is our place in society and what is right governance, right? It's like a lot of fantasies about like, what is right governance, right? Like, who's the just king, right? Do we need a king? Should we overthrow all kings, right? Those questions are in science fiction too, right? And we relate to them with an overlapping but separate set of symbols, right? Aliens instead of elves, and so on. And so I don't really think they're different genres, and increasingly I think they're converging. And so distinguishing them is really a matter of window dressing. It's like, do you have robots or do you have wizards, or do you have both? Both is the right answer. It is the best answer, but because it's the most fun answer. But I kind of think it's the same thing, because I think nobody is writing educational science fiction stories really anymore. At least that's not the main focus. It's not the mainstream. Although you can learn a lot from reading like Alastair Reynolds. I love that guy. Right, but that's like learning about physics and engineering in the same way that you learn about animal husbandry and like horseback riding from reading the right fantasy writer, right? It's like incidental instruction rather than the point of the story.
He's my absolute favorite. Alastair Reynolds is.
He's a genius.
I think he's the greatest science fiction author working today. Yeah. If I've been dreaming for years that we could get someone to adapt Revelation Space into a film series or something like that. For me, guys, I don't know if you feel the same way that I do. I think it's partly the sense of combining our fantasy and sci-fi as being immersed in worlds that are totally different from our own, that work in a different way. In sci-fi, you're often reading about the future and what the future could be if we operated on different assumptions or planned our societies differently, or if we were exposed
or failed to.
or failed to, or if, you know, we were exposed to, like in Project Hail Mary, different contingencies that are outside of our control. So in Project Hail Mary, there is we discover this threat of the astrophage, and it turns out, spoiler alert, that we end up being able to do something.
That
really
means
cool.
Sun Eater, by the way.
What's that?
I said that means Sun Eater, by the way.
The astrophage, yeah.
I did not get it from him, contrary to what some Goodreads reviewers think. I was first.
It's a literal sun eater, yes.
But yes.
Yeah. But I would say, and I know you agree with this, Christopher, that it's also the sense of exploring new frontiers. And that ends up also being one of the things that gives birth to science fiction as a genre, and that it makes it so urgent, is the idea that in the 19th century, there was a sense that we had begun to run out of new frontiers. We'd explored the jungles, we'd navigated the seas, we'd mapped out the world, we'd cataloged most living species, and we kind of mapped the heavens. And so there's a sense that we are in a need of new frontiers. And as humans, we yearn from them. Right.
And you can see the transition, by the way, very clearly in Lovecraft, right? Because Mountains of Madness is about Antarctica, which is like the last place, right? And then where does that lead? Right beyond the stars, right? There's this very clear transition in not just his writing, but in Smith's and in a lot of their contemporaries, right? Because in that period too, this is like a whole other stream, but it's something. You got Liam here. You should talk to Liam about some of those, because Liam's the man.
Liam knows everything.
Liam does know everything. But like, they weren't really making new worlds, right? Early science fiction fantasy writers, they were inserting these stories into ours, right? And so it wasn't that there was a Cthulhu universe that they were all creating. They were just making up myths for Earth, right? Which is why all those old Weird Tales writers reference each other. It's not that like Howard and Lovecraft were writing a shared universe. They were just writing stories for Earth, right? It's a very different attitude from the attitude we all have now. It's the Tim Powers thing, right? It's not that this is an Earth with vampires. It's Earth and there were vampires, right? It's a very different way of thinking than like every fantasy writer now. And it's so hard for us to, oh shoot, go back, right? Hit the button. Because we've read so many books and our understanding what fantasy and science fiction are is so conditioned, right, by the science fiction and fantasy who come before it. For somebody to go back and write a 1920s science fiction novel is an act of time travel as difficult as actual time travel, right? And so to go back and think that way, right, not just about this one thing, but about the relationship between the story and technology, right? Or whatever makes it fantasy, right? To write fantasy, like just think about writing fantasy novel, no magic system, right? Just don't do it. Don't think about magic systems. Don't think that way about magic, right? Think the old way. Think how Edison thought about magic. Think how Tolkien thought about magic. Don't think like Brandon Sanderson. It's very hard, right? Because every fantasy writer pitch that I got when I was an editor started with magic systems. Right? They couldn't even think outside that box anymore. Right? Man, like, that makes me sad. I'm going to end on that sad note because I need to go rescue my wife here in just a minute. She's asking me where I am. So
before you run off,
yes.
Coop did have a question and ask. Yeah. So he's been trying to get me to read Blind Sight for a while now, and I've promised I would read it. I do need to get to it soon. Have you read Blind Sight?
I have not. No, that's like the space vampire book, right?
That's up next on my TBR.
Oh, cool.
So,
cool.
You let us know.
Yeah. I'm making a First Contact. I love First Contact. I fell in love with Carl Sagan's
Contact.
What's that?
Contact.
Contact. Both the film. I saw the film first, and then I actually taught in my fantasy and sci-fi lit course Contact, because what I love about that is not only is it scientifically plausible and it's an interesting contact story, but it's also about how we would process that at a societal level, at a religious level, at a kind of at the level of human nature and that sort of thing. And I think he handles the whole First Contact thing very well.
He's a really good writer. He's a terrible historian, but he's a really good writer.
I liked Cosmos. I liked you wouldn't like this. I like Demon Haunted World.
It's very beautifully written.
And he's like, for an AP Lang teacher, he's a great rhetorician. He's a great stylist. But no, like, we don't align fully in our worldviews. No. Who does? But I will say that I'm putting together this video about the best First Contact novels, and I've been reading so many of them. I'm trying to read like 30 of them and narrow it down to like 10, so that the video is like really authentic. And the next one, next up is Blind Sight. So, cool. Wow. If you guys are reading that next, I would love to. I'll message you about it and stuff like that. And
I'd also like to add another one onto your TBR list for that big long list of First Contact.
Okay.
Discovery by J.A.J. Minton.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I highly recommend that book.
I heard it's really good. I'm really happy for John.
It's
send me a copy. I haven't read it yet, but
it's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal.
What's it about? Because I read. So I had about 5 or 6 that I'd already read. I recently read Moten God's Eye. I really did not like that. 3 out of 5. I read Rendezvous with Rama. 4 out of 5. It was quite good. I read Project Hail Mary. I'm reading Existence by David Brin. I've got a bunch on the list, and I'm kind of plowing through them. What is this?
Discovery is a cosmic horror First Contact story of the way. So this is like spoilers for basically chapter 1 is like, it's the back of the book blurb, but imagine in the 1990s a failed, disgraced TV game show host with cosmic intervention reveals to the world that basically Cthulhu has almost always been on Earth and lives in the deepest parts of the ocean, and the entire world sees. What happens?
That sounds great.
So it goes across different cultures, like both how would religions react to this? How would governments react to it? How would the scientific community react? How would it change the development of science? What would be
Rocky, do you need to head out, by the way?
Yeah, I need to go, guys. Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble if
I promise we'll wrap it up. Rocky, you can go if you want.
Yeah, it's okay. I got to sleep anyway. I'll leave on an actual stinger because I have to turn in my revisions tomorrow. So,
okay.
I get it.
All right. What's that, Jordan?
Talking.
No, I said I get it. Makes sense.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you guys later. It's always a pleasure, gentlemen. All right.
Pleasure.
Bye, Christopher.
Bye. Oh, I'm interested in this, Richard. That sounds great.
And
it's phenomenal.
Wrap all of that in a very unique and novel story structure that I don't think I've really experienced it this way. It feels like a new structure. It's very novel. It's weird, but God damn, it's so good.
That sounds awesome. So it's new. It's like a.
So
when was it published?
It comes out tomorrow.
And you got the ARC digital or whatever.
Yeah. So add on top of how kind of cool. Love the book, but the cool structure of it. So the authors, it's written by 3 people and a whole family. John, Amy, and Jacob Minton, the people on Talking Story. So Talking Story, the YouTube channel, their family wrote this book together.
Oh, wow.
And, it's so cool.
Wow.
Tomorrow, you'll be able to pick up a book.
We're
I
doing a stream
highly
with them
recommend
tomorrow
everyone still
for the release.
watching.
Yeah.
Go to Talking Stories YouTube channel tomorrow. There's going to be a live stream. It's like a big whole release event.
We'll be there to promote it even more. That book floored us. It was, if you're looking for First Contact, that is the first contact to read.
Wow.
They I don't know how they did it. So
it's definitely something of, especially when I read it, I was going like, with the amount of different traditionally published stories I was reading, I was so happy to read something that felt fresh. It felt fresh and new, and I loved it.
Well, that is great to hear, and I will definitely check that out. In fact, I don't even think that I think I may have watched one of John's videos. I don't even know if I'm subscribed to him, but that sounds great. And from what I hear, John is a great guy. So I need to get on that and like dive into that. And so I appreciate the recommendation, guys. Thanks for coming on too. I guess we'll wrap it up here. I really appreciate you guys coming on. I've been loving your content. Keep up the great work, and just keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic. Thank you again.
thanks a bunch, man. This was anytime. This was so fun for us, or at least for me. I think Rich didn't like talking about Wheel of Time.
Well, that was a mess. That was totally like freewheeling and impromptu, and so sorry if that was like a mess or whatever. It was kind of
no. I mean, you made Rich's day, and I don't like that you did that. So I'm frustrated. He's not.
All right,
this was, I love this,
guys.
This is awesome, man.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Bye.
All right.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
everybody.
Bye.